Welcome to Reroute Reflections, where we share our thoughts and insights about relationships, wellness, and business. We're your hosts, Becca and Andrew. We've been married for 10 years and have plenty of knowledge and experience in our relationship, the wellness industry, and the business world. Grab a coffee and let's chat.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, welcome back.
Episode 6.
Another one, yeah.
Yeah, honestly,
Exciting.
I'm really enjoying this little weekly routine that we've got.
Yeah.
Sort of weekly.
We took last week off.
Yeah.
And the week before?
Yeah, it's been 2 weeks. Yeah, it's a good thing that we were ahead of schedule.
I know. We got to stop taking breaks now. We got to keep up with it.
Honestly, life just gets in the way sometimes, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, we are back, and hopefully we can continue to do this more routinely.
Yeah.
But it is good because I find the closer we do it to actually the launch of the episode, the more relevant the material is.
Yes.
And I find that's really helpful, especially for the Let's Talk Business segment or series.
Well, even when we're providing weekly updates about what's going on with us, I found it weird in the first episode that I didn't even have a job yet, and yet in real time I was already a month into my position, so it felt really far behind.
Yeah. But for this week, we've got a really interesting topic. It's a topic that I've been following for a long time personally, the 4-day work week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept. I've had the opportunity to learn a lot more about what the 4-day work week, where it all started, where it came from, some of the trends, some of the ideas that some forward-thinking organizations are putting forward, and a lot of the results from some of the tests that have started after the pandemic are starting to flood in, and really excited to dive into it.
Should be good.
But before we do that, as we always do, let's start with our weekly recap. I think last week you started, so this week I'll start. Yeah, so this week has been pretty busy. And it's funny because the last episode when we were talking about the weekly recap, I was talking about how the week is getting, I feel like I don't have enough to do, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it's funny how week to week things can change so much. I think for me, it's just the type of work that I'm in. It goes from being incredibly busy a couple of weeks and then complete radio silence. And sometimes it's hard to work through those ebbs and flows. But this week was busy. And unfortunately, just the way I am, I love that. That actually makes me feel engaged and excited to come to work, always knowing that I've got something to do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this week has been a lot of fun. Worked on some really interesting pieces of work. This week, we were working on a lessons learned process. So for those who don't know, it's exactly what it sounds like. So after a big project, and ideally throughout a project, you do these kind of checkpoints where you get to talk about what are some of the things that didn't really go according to plan, and how would you change that if we were to do a similar project moving forward? And this activity I find incredibly helpful as a consultant because I get the opportunity to hear from others around what I could have done better, what the team could have done better, and then I can apply that to other projects that I work on down the road. So it's a really interesting exercise, and it was on a merger and acquisition and M&A project that I was working on, and just a lot of really great insights. It always makes me want to just dive into another one to apply some of the lessons that were learned. And so putting together that report has been actually a lot of fun, which sounds nerdy, but that's the type of stuff I love. And then I am working on a proposal for a new project that hopefully gets kickstarted just around communication and strategy, and how do we refresh and make sure people are getting the right information to the right people at the right time. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, it's all about setting that expectation.
Yeah.
And so it's really important and fun work, and it's always so complex trying to find the right channels and all of that kind of stuff. So hopefully that gets picked up. But yeah, that was basically my week.
Nice.
How was your week?
I feel like it was similar. Last week at work was relatively quiet, which was always a good thing for a hospital because there's less people coming in for emergencies or with needing operations and whatever. This week was definitely a bit busier, but I think similarly to you, that's where I thrive the most. I get too bored if I don't have enough to do, and that's how I felt towards the end of last week. I was done with my work by 1 o'clock, and I was what am I going to do now? Yeah. So yeah, this week was definitely busier. Had a lot more patients come on to my caseload, which is not good for them, but
yeah, it's really tough. So yeah, you're busy means people are actually getting sick or injured and hurt. So
it's a weird limbo because I want to be busy, but at the same time I'm it means people are injured or hurt.
Yeah, that's tough.
So yeah, it's yeah.
But you celebrated a few milestones this week.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. So I know, I'm like, what happened this week? So Thursday, the 20th, was Dietitian's Day. It's like an official day that was announced in Canada a few years ago, I think. But for me, it was my very first one as an official registered dietitian, so that was pretty exciting. At work, we got a little celebration lunch on our unit, and we had cake, and yeah, we got some nice little notes from some team members of ours, so that was nice. And then tomorrow, the 24th, is my birthday. So at work this week, we had a celebratory lunch for me, which was nice. We ordered fresh, and everyone brought in some chips and some drinks and stuff, and we had a nice like hour-long lunch together, which was good.
And Fresh is a restaurant for folks who might not know.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Yeah, a vegan restaurant, right?
Yeah.
100%? Yeah.
Well, if you haven't had it before, it's delightful. So.
It is.
And they have a really good brunch.
Yes.
Brunch is really good.
I think we had plans to do it tomorrow for your birthday.
Yes, yeah.
But it's a busy weekend. We're doing the rounds with family, you know, for your birthday. And then next weekend is your party.
And next weekend we're going to do my birthday party, yeah.
Yeah, should we tell them about a little bit about that party?
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, let's talk about it. It was your idea. So it was just around a murder mystery themed
I wanted to
dinner.
do like a murder mystery dinner, yeah. I thought it would be a fun way to still get everyone together and have a dinner and have it be chill, but at the same time it like gives us like a fun activity to do throughout the night.
Yeah, so you're just not like sitting around for hours.
Yeah. I think it's fun.
I think it's great, yeah. And so I never like the idea of somebody whose birthday it is like doing the lion's share of the work for their birthday.
Right.
Like I just don't think that's right. Maybe it's because I prefer not to do anything for my birthday.
Yeah.
Like to plan it. I'd rather somebody else do that for me, and so I just apply that same logic with you. And when you said the murder mystery, I was like, okay, let's see what we can do. And so I was looking into like, how do you even do that? Do we just go to a dinner? Should we hire actors, or what can we do? And I found that there's so many resources online just around like scripts and characters, and so we ended up finding one that I think is incredible and really aligns to what you love, which is the world of Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And me and my sister are going to be directing this murder mystery dinner of sorts for you next week. And I'm really excited. I'm really nervous. I hope it goes on, without a hitch, or goes off without a hitch.
I think it will, because part of the package that you bought has like character guides.
Oh,
so you and I went through one day and chose a character for each person coming.
Yeah.
So everyone will get like a little booklet, and it will tell them exactly about their character, and then it also gives them like scripts for each part of the night, like what to say and like how things are supposed to go. So I feel like it should be pretty seamless, because nobody's got to think on the spot and come up with this like character.
Yeah, and it's all family or family friends who are essentially family. And so I think it's a really close-knit group, so I feel like everyone will feel comfortable like acting and
we'll just have fun
playing
with
the parts. And we're going all out. There will be prizes, and which actually the guests don't even know about yet.
That's true.
So it'll be a lot of fun, and we'll fill you in on how it all goes after the fact.
In the future,
Yeah.
So it should be fun.
So let's dive into today's topic then. 4-day work week. So we thought that we would start just by giving an overview of kind of what the 4-day work week is, a little bit of background, not just about where the 4-day work week came from, but how did we get to this whole like
even the 5-day work week?
Where did that even come from?
Right now,
and then hopefully that sets a bit of the groundwork, and then we'll talk about why the 4-day work week has gained so much momentum recently. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the examples of companies that have done this, and what have they seen? And then we'll talk a little bit about like how would you actually do this in an organization? So maybe I'll let you start. What is a 4-day work week?
Obviously, it's a modification on our traditional 5-day, 40-hour work week. So you'd work 4 days, 32 hours. So it's not like you would try and cram more hours into that 4 days now.
That's important distinction, right? Because a lot of people think when you say 4-day work week, it's like, I'm going to work 10 hours a day for 4 days.
To like make up for the missing last day.
No, a true 4-day work week is 4 days, 8 hours a day for a total of 32 hours a week.
Yeah, maintaining like that same level of productivity and also keeping like your same pay for the 4 days versus the 5 days. The concept like a broader movement around flexible work arrangements and aiming to improve like work-life balance, reducing stress, increasing job satisfaction without having to sacrifice like the quality of your work or your output. And I think this has come about more so now since COVID.
Yeah, it has definitely picked up a lot of momentum post-COVID, post-pandemic. And I think a lot of it has to do with the idea of for a 4-day work week to really work, you really need to make sure that you have a lot of pieces in place within the organization. One of the key things is you need to make sure that the organization is running as efficiently as possible.
Right.
Because if you're running inefficiently, then you're more likely going to need a longer work week in order to accommodate for the fact that the business isn't as efficient as it can be. And so if you have a lot of inefficiencies, it's almost like you can't start a 4-day work week. You need to become more efficient. And then that time that you save, you'll be able to reinvest it, if you will, into shorter work. And it's the biggest misconception, I think, with a 4-day work week is and one of the things that we'll talk about is this idea, there is a risk of a 4-day work week actually causing more stress on workers because the output needs to be the same. Your output is still at 100%. And if your output's at 100% and you're working less, that means you have to work harder. And so that can introduce a lot of stress within the organization and within people. And so that it is definitely something that's not just an easy solution that we can just launch and just hope for the best. There's a lot of work that needs to go into making the organization set up for success.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about like where this whole work week came into place, because it was funny when we were looking at and doing some research on this podcast in particular, started asking the question like, okay, where did the 4-day work week come from? It was like also like, where did the 5-day work week come from? There was one article that I saw from National Geographic's just around like where the 5-day work week started from. And it was really interesting and really fascinating, and it actually made a lot of sense. So based on the article, it was talking about how work weeks essentially were like 6 days.
Oh my God.
Yeah, people would work all the time. The only day that they would have off essentially was like they would work all the time. That was the norm.
Yeah, if you think about like farmers and stuff, like they don't have days off.
Yeah, and we were also very inefficient back then.
Yeah.
You know, no technology, no nothing. The typical work week was essentially 6 days because Sunday they took off because of Mass, and it was God's day of rest. So it was only 6 days a week. And it wasn't until kind of the Jewish community came in and said, hey guys, like, yeah, I understand that you have the day of rest on Sunday, but our Sabbath is Saturday.
Oh.
And that kind of started to create the movement to say, no, let's have a 5-day work week. And that got a little bit of attention, but it wasn't until Henry Ford, instituted it in his plants, his automotive plants or whatever they called them.
Yeah, he's talking about Henry Ford of Ford cars.
Ford Motors,
I didn't know that at first either.
Yeah, Henry Ford. Yeah,
like,
we do have
dude who makes Ford cars.
Yeah, we do have a premier in Ontario, Doug Ford.
Yeah, don't get them confused.
Not the same guy.
No.
I don't. Maybe they're related. I don't know. But he decided to introduce the 5-day work week, and I think because of the size of his company and kind of the prestige that he had and the influence that he had in America, everyone kind of followed suit. And so the 5-day work week started to become a norm. Another thing that Henry Ford did, he brought the assembly line, but apparently he also brought the 5-day work week. And so by the 1930s, the 5-day work week was the norm. And we're approaching the 100-year mark of the 5-day work week, which is fascinating when you consider the fact that in terms of our productivity levels, we have increased our productivity level by 400%.
Oh my God.
Since the 1930s.
Yeah.
400%. That means we are 4 times more productive than we were back then, but we were still working.
5
days a week. So I think this concept or this idea of like, where did this whole 4-day work week start? To be honest, it's more of a question of like, why aren't we there yet?
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating. And Bernie Sanders actually just pushed a bill forward recently for the 4-day work week without a loss in pay.
Oh.
And that's the other thing too. It's a 4-day work week, but does that mean I get a pay cut?
Right.
No, because that's not a 4-day work week.
Right.
It is a 4-day, 8 hours per day week.
Like it would still be a full-time position, but
Yeah.
instead of working 40 hours, now the norm for a full-time job would be 32 hours a week.
Exactly. And you talked a little bit about the benefits already when you gave the definition. But did you want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the benefits associated with the 4-day work week? A lot of them are obvious, but I think it's worth spelling them out.
Yeah, and I think there's some that like are maybe not so obvious. Like we talked about some before, but I think when I think about this too, it's more about putting like your employees first.
Mm-hmm.
I know even from my time working at Starbucks, we're all about putting the customer first and doing whatever they need, but I was even of the opinion back then that if I took good care of my employees and actually made sure they were having a good time at work, then naturally the customer experience would improve. And I think that also applies here with the 4-day work week, because if you're allowing your employees to have an extra day off of work, they're still getting the same amount, of pay and all of that stuff. Naturally, I feel like their overall wellness will improve in terms of like mental health, physical health, like all of that. Like they're going to have that extra day now to do what they need to do. And in turn, this is going to lead to them performing better at work for both the clients and the business overall, because they're going to come to work happier and more willing to put that time in and get things done quickly because they know they're getting that day off work. And then tied into that is now an overall improvement in the business overall.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff is not even just conjecture or theories. This has been proven time and time again. I think the 4-day work week started in New Zealand. It's gotten a lot of attention in Iceland. It's got a lot of attention in the UK. America is starting to follow suit, and even Canadian companies are doing this. And it's a fact now that a 4-day work week will drive better employee wellness, happier employees, which will eventually lead into performance. And you say about the whole like customer focus, that's what every business always talks about. It's like customers first, customers first. I never agreed with that statement. It was always, the trend was you put your employees first, they'll then put the customer first, and then business performance will follow. That was always the model that I always envisioned. And it's why Reroute Consulting, our slogan is employees first. Because I truly believe that you focus on that, everything else will come.
Yeah.
And that's super important. So when we look at the companies who have tried this out, there does appear to be a leading organization globally that is helping companies adopt a 4-day work week. The company is a 4-day work global. I'll put the link to their site in the show notes. But they approach introducing or implementing a 4-day work week by a model that they call 180-100. And so their model is basically the 100 is 100% salary, 100% output, 80% of the hours. So that's the model that they introduce, and that seems to be what a lot of companies are using when they're thinking about implementing the 4-day work week. And again, it's 4 days at 8 hours a day, not 4 days at 10 hours a day. And there is a company actually, and it's funny because we wrote an article about the 4-day work week months ago.
Right, for Reroute Consulting, yeah.
Yeah. Occasionally we'll post articles there, and there was one company that we talked about in that article, a Canadian company, who was just starting to introduce the 4-day work week as a pilot. So testing it out. And at the time that we wrote the article, they were entering into the 6-month pilot, so they had no results.
Oh.
So I took a look before this episode to see if they had posted the results, and they have.
Nice.
Preliminary results, at least.
Yeah.
And they've seen a 42% increase in work-life balance for their employees, 26% increase in mental health. Not really sure how they measured that, but, well, we'll just pass on over that. 25% reduction in time taken off for personal and sick days. It's incredible, right? Like short-term disability, that type of stuff. And 15% less time spent on internal and administrative tasks, which really speaks to the whole idea of building the enablers first that you need. And one of the key ones to introducing a 4-day work week, I think, is making sure that your company is running as efficiently as possible. So things like administrative tasks that, you can automate, those are the type of things that you're probably going to want to do first before you introduce the 4-day work weeks. I think those are incredible stats. So it speaks to what we were talking about earlier, just this idea that the concepts and the benefits are there, and they're pretty strong. In fact, when this company decided to introduce the 4-day work week pilot, they were joined with 59 other North American companies
Wow.
as part of the pilot, working with a 4-day work week global. 4-day week global.
Yeah.
4-day week global.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, what?
Say that 10 times fast.
Yeah, and so this idea of like employee wellness, driving better business performance, is one of the key benefits associated with moving forward into the 4-day work week. But there's also a bunch of different benefits that some other companies have even introduced that literally my head didn't even go to. And it's things like electricity bills. So Microsoft Japan saw a 23% reduction in electricity consumption and a 59% reduction in paper printing after implementing a 4-day work week.
Just because they cut 1 day of workout?
Yeah, so it's there's a lot of, and there's plenty of other things that I think unless you try it, you won't even know that you benefit from. But I think the moral of the story here is to try it and to see what happens. In fact, 90% of the corporations that try it decide to continue the 4-day work week strategy. So something's working.
I feel like we saw this a lot throughout COVID too. Like before COVID even happened, most companies were like, no, like you can't work from home all of the time. If you need a day off because you're sick, or you have to work from home for the afternoon because you have to go to an appointment or whatever. But everyone was like, no, it's not possible.
So true.
And then COVID happened and they had to make it work. And I think that was like the ultimate way to just demonstrate that what is possible. And if anything, I think that should like fuel this kind of strategy more too, to be like, why don't we just try it and see what happens instead of always being like, no, that'll never work.
I love that, actually. That's such a great, I didn't even think about that. We were forced into the remote work situation.
Right.
We're not forced into the 4-day work week situation, but I love that. It's exactly the same kind of premise here. It's like, why not give it a shot and just see what happens? Maybe it doesn't work.
And then just go back to 5 days.
Yeah,
it's
exactly,
fine. But
right?
like, at least try it.
Just try it. There's so much evidence now. And like, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Let's just give it a shot.
I guess if we were to try and make it happen then, because you're in change management, so
this would be a change.
How would you like get a company to approach this?
Oh, how would I do it? Man, I feel my imposter syndrome coming on.
This is your
this is my time to shine. Yeah, like I think so. For me, I always approach change in a certain way, an approach that I have, and I apply it to every kind of change, big or small. And there's a lot of fluidity in it because we're dealing with people, and we're dealing when people are complex. And so I don't like the word framework, but I do follow a general framework when it comes to change. The first thing that I always do is prepare for it. And I do that by trying to understand the organization itself. Coming as an external party, usually I don't have a lot of background within the organization. If I'm thinking about a 4-day work week implementation, I'm going to try to understand, okay, what's this organization like? What's the culture at the organization today? What are their feelings around work? What are their norms? Are they a traditional employer that is like a bank, government, working 5 days a week? And the idea of moving to a 4-day work week is something that's going to be just resistant right off the bat? Or are they more modern and they love this idea of experimentation and trying new things to move the needle and grow as an organization? Is that part of their culture? Because then that will make it an easier sell to try to get people to buy into the idea of a 4-day work week.
Yeah, I picture like a Google or an Apple where like they're pretty innovative companies already and they're always willing to challenge the status quo and try something new.
Right? Or are they kind of a company that whether they're more productive or not doesn't matter because they have, government funding. So they're okay with kind of status quo. Are they unionized? Are they not unionized? Like all of these types of things really will play into the strategy. And so I need to understand more about the organization. And you do that usually just by talking to people. It's really that simple. You just have a conversation with stakeholders and try to understand, what the culture is and what, importantly, how have they managed change like this in the past? Has it been successful? Do people have any recollection of failed changes? Because that will affect whether people think any kind of change is going to be successful. And so you're just trying to get a better understanding of the organization. The other thing, and we talked about this, is just around like the efficiency level of the organization, right? Are they efficient enough to be able to move to a 4-day work week?
Right.
Is there a lot of manual tasks that is something that they will be willing to automate before they introduce the 4-day work week? Or is this something that they're not willing to do? And that will give you a better indication of whether the company is going to be set up for success or not. And so it's really just trying to get a lay of the land. And so that's where everything starts for me. And then once you understand all of the pieces, then you can start to create the plan. And so if I've identified that there's a lot of key enablers that need to happen ahead of a 4-day work week, then it will be things like, okay, we have a lot of inefficiencies within the organizations. How do we build automation in? How do we streamline some of these types of activities? How do we introduce training, for example, for employees around things like managing their time, prioritizing tasks, things like that. And this idea of like always looking for continuous improvement. Because if you're working 4 days, you have to be efficient. There's no room for error. If you spend 4 hours on a task that should take you an hour, that is going to impact your ability to work 4 days.
Yeah.
And you're going to think it failed, but it had nothing to do with working 4 days. It had everything to do with how the organization was set up.
Well, we already run into that problem even with the 5-day work week, because most people who are in a full-time job should be working 37 and a half or 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of people out there who are still working 50, 60 hours just because they have so much work in their day that they can't get it done in the 40 hours. And I don't know if that's like a personal efficiency problem, or if they truly just have like gaps where they need to hire more people, or like things like that too, right?
That's a really great point, because that would be part of the prep phase where it's like trying to get a sense of, because everyone says they work. It depends on the culture of the organization too. Some organizations, like there's one in particular that I work for right now, and they have a very healthy overtime environment where people are encouraged to book overtime if they work overtime.
Over their 40 hours.
But I've worked for organizations who are not like that at all and don't have that same healthy overtime culture. And so people will say that they work 40 hours, but in fact they're working 60.
Yeah, and they're just like expected to manage it themselves. If you stay an extra hour, just make up for it somewhere else whenever you can.
Yeah. One of the key things you need to do is to assess how much are people working? Like, how many hours are they working? Actually working. Because if the organization thinks, hey, we're going to move to 4 days because of all these benefits, but because we think our employees are working 5 days, and then you do the analysis and you figure out, no, people are actually working 50 hours a week.
Yeah.
There's a lot that needs to change in order to get them from working, what is that? Is that like a 6 days? I don't know. Whatever. That, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it is. It's like you need to move from a 6-day work week to a 5. Like, that's your goal.
You can't go down to a 4.
And then you probably get the same benefits because now people have a weekend or are not working late nights. And so it's really trying to understand the lay of the land and trying to figure out, what do I need to do in order to make sure that I'm setting this organization up for success. And the things that any gap in that phase is going to negatively impact everything else that follows. And so spending time and doing it right in this phase is always the most important. And it's also where you get the most pushback, because people are like, okay, let's go. Like, it's time
to make it happen.
Let's do this. And I'm like, I don't even know what I don't know yet, you know? And so it's important to have these conversations, identify where the gaps are so that you can kind of set yourself up for success.
Get like a baseline.
Yeah. And so once you have all of these pieces, you'll know what needs to happen first. And then you put that plan together. And sometimes you go into it, maybe it being like a 4-day work week and project, but it turns into a multi-phase, multi-year implementation where you're thinking, okay, we need to build efficiency first. Once we build those efficiencies, we then assess and say, are we actually achieving the efficiencies that we sought out for? Yes or no. If not, keep going. If yes, now we start to talk about a 4-day work week. And so, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. And I think a lot of times people have that misconception. Your company may be thinking about this already. Your company may already be in the process of wanting to introduce a 4-day work week, but they're in the we need to build the efficiencies first stage. And they just haven't communicated it yet because they don't know if it's possible.
Well, and I think it depends on like the size of the company too, because like with you and your company, for example, you're a one-man show. So I think for you, if you were to think about things, you could easily just be like, all right, starting on Monday, I'm going to do a 4-week for a 4-day work week and like just see how it goes, right?
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in your company, like there's no way you can just send an email, be like, all right, everyone, starting next week, we're doing 4 days and like hope for the best. We'll see what happens. Like that's going to be a mess.
Yeah, and it also kind of talks to like some of the stuff that we were talking about in the past, which was this idea of a one-size-fits-all approach. And we talked about it as part of the hybrid work week. And there is a chance that 4-day work week isn't going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
There may be jobs. And I mean, a part of me is like, I don't know if that's really true, to be honest. Like, I can't think of an example where the 4-day work week wouldn't work.
Well, for healthcare, it wouldn't work.
Why not?
Because we've got patients 24 hours a day, like 7 days a week.
You just have different, like, schedules.
It's true. Actually, yeah. We were talking about this at work the other day. You know, doctors are rotating every 2 weeks. Nurses are rotating every couple of, like, days. Like, they'll work a few shifts, 12-hour shifts or something in a row and then have a couple days off. And we were just like, the only people that patients are seeing consistently almost every single day of their admission are registered dietitians and pharmacists. Mm-hmm. We're the only ones who like aren't rotating. If you are assigned to a unit, that's your unit. You're there 5 days a week, no matter what.
Yeah.
So I'm like, now that we're talking about it, why not have us also rotating more? I guess the struggle I have is it's not giving a better patient experience. And I think that's part of the problem and why we were talking about this is because the patients suffer when we're rotating too often. Because we have some patients who have seen 3 or 4 different doctors now over their admission, and each one of their doctors is giving them a different sense of what their diagnosis is because they just can't figure it out yet. And so it's, if we had one consistent doctor every single day for that patient's admission, I think they might be able to provide answers sooner and like run through all the tests they think are appropriate, like all this stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
It's tricky.
And I think it goes into kind of, you have the plan, you start to execute it. And if you get to the place where, and maybe your organization is efficient enough to try the 4-day work week, so let's assume that it is, like all the key enablers are in place, you can do it. You got to test it out, you know? And that's the important thing here. Is you don't, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with change of any kind, and this is where I'll get on my soapbox and I'll get really irritated, is because the pilot is always, or the test is always the thing that people think is a nice to have. It is essential. I don't understand why people, for whatever reason, think, oh no, we don't have time to do this.
We're just going to make it happen.
We're just going to make it happen. What. It's like driving with a blindfold on. Sure, maybe you get to your destination, but what are the odds? I think people assume incorrectly that you can predict outcomes of change. You can't. The only time you know what's going to happen is when it's happening.
And
That's
if it's
it.
like just to you.
Yeah.
Even in that sense, sometimes things don't go the way you plan.
We talked about mental health.
Yeah.
And we talked about that box activity that I did where I tried to predict my own behavior.
Yeah.
You know, me. Nobody knows me better than me. And I still sucked at it.
You still couldn't predict what was going to be the
Or
outcome.
what was going to happen to me. What makes you think that you're going to be able to predict what's going to happen with thousands of people?
Yeah.
Like
how they're all going to react.
Yeah.
How they're all going to take the change.
Yeah, come on.
True.
Like, it doesn't happen that way. The only time you'll know whether something is going to work or not is when you do it. And through a pilot, you get the opportunity to have a very controlled group, small group, that's hopefully representative of your entire organization as best that you can, and see what happens when you do something. And if and you're going to learn. There's not one pilot I've ever done where I do it and I'm like, it's exactly what I thought was going to happen. It's always, oh, I didn't think of that. And so the long-winded way of saying with the hospital example is maybe it doesn't work, but maybe it does. And so the only way you'll know is if you try it. And then things like, oh, you know what, patient care did suffer. And you measure that. And then you have a conversation to say, do we want to take that risk? Right. Or is there ways for us to negate the negative impact on patient experience some other way and still implement this thing? And those are conversations that you have, but now you have real data to have the conversation on rather than speculation. And so that's why the pilot is super important, but not just piloting. Oh my God, if I had $1 for every time we like pilot in air quotes something without any metrics. You have to figure out like, what is your measure of success? What does success at the end of the pilot look like? If we're talking about 4-day work week, it should be things like employee experience. It should be things like productivity. Those are the types of things, apparently electricity bills, but like these are the types of things that you need to have and you have targets for before the pilot starts. You set your baseline, run the pilot, and see whether you achieve those results that you want. If you didn't achieve those results, then you have to say to yourself, is there something else that we need to do in order to get there? Or is this just not for us? And you have to make that call. Otherwise, if you just run a pilot, like how do you know whether it worked or not?
Yeah.
Just because the loudest person in the room said it was great? Or the loudest person in the room said it was terrible? No, you need to take out all that stuff.
And figure out like what's valuable to your organization.
Yeah, and then the other thing is you got to iterate. So you pilot it doesn't work. You don't just scrap it and kind of, feel like, no, it's okay. Let's try something else. It's like, okay, well, this didn't work the way that we expected, but what if we try this instead? All right, let's try it and see what happens. And then launch it, right? And you ideally launch it in a digestible chunk. You scale it up slowly. So you launch it region by region. You kind of expand that pilot group out until it reaches the masses, the organization as a whole. And you don't stop gathering feedback and you don't stop iterating, because the pilot group is just one group. They may be representative, but once you expand it, you might learn new things.
Yeah.
Keep listening, keep iterating, and eventually when it gets to everybody, hopefully you've ironed out all the kinks.
Yeah.
And you still won't get it right.
Yeah.
You still won't. But you hopefully get it as close to right as you possibly could, and that's how you launch a successful change. Not easy. This is the hardest thing in the world. No, not the hardest thing in the world, but probably it's incredibly difficult. Change of any scale, even individually, change is hard.
Even in my work, I'm working on like health behavior change.
Yeah.
Like any change is hard. Doesn't matter if you're trying to change your diet for your lifestyle, whether you're trying to change how work goes.
Yeah.
Everything's difficult for humans when it comes to change.
Yeah, so that's how I would do it. If I was running, if a client came to me and was saying that they are interested in running or introducing a 4-day work week, that's how I would advise them to proceed.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way to go, and I would be surprised to hear that the 4-day week global does anything differently. With the success that they've seen, I assume they're probably doing something very similar.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the next part is Listener's Corner.
Yeah.
I feel like every time
little segment that
I think it's good for this one.
We're testing and learning. We're trying things. We're piloting different things.
So we're not big enough yet for actual listeners to actually come to us and give their opinions, but I'd love to.
We have quite a few solid listeners already.
Oh yeah, it's true. I think we obviously didn't go ahead of time and reach out and say, this is what we're going to talk about. What are your questions? But these are the questions that we got from a few friends and colleagues of ours. So the first one is, I work in an industry that's very traditional and has always valued long hours at the office as a sign of dedication. I love the idea of a 4-day work week, but I'm not sure how to even begin discussing this with management. Any advice on how to approach this conversation? That's a tough one, because this is something that's deep rooted in the culture of the organization, and it's not something that will change overnight. Yeah. I would say this would be an incredibly difficult situation or organization to get the 4-day work week for them to be a leading organization in this trend.
Because it's a culture change that needs to happen.
And so this would go kind of against that organizational culture. And so and not to say that a traditional organization wouldn't adopt a 4-day work week. I just think they would be more the laggards. So they'd be the ones like near the end of the curve to be like, okay, we're losing a lot of really strong people and a lot of strong talent. So if we don't adopt a 4-day work week, then we're, going to not be able. We'll fall behind. People are going to retire, and once they retire, we have nobody of skill to come back to us. People are coming to us as a last resort. Yeah. Because why would I go to a 5-day work week organization when I can go to a 4-day work week, get paid the same amount for less time?
Yeah.
So I do think with this case, it'd be, if you really like the 4-day work week idea, a traditional organization might not be the place where you'll be able to see it right away. They'll need to see like the stats and the benefits. It has to be smacked in their face, and they'll probably be the ones who, unless they're forced to do it, they won't do it, just because there's just too much risk for a large traditional organization to make such a change. Because if they get it wrong, these companies are usually public, and so there's a lot of shareholders that they are going to be impacting, and even the economy of the nation in which they operate could be significantly impacted. So there's just too much risk for them to make that play. But it's not to say that they wouldn't if they're not forced to. How you could give it a shot, I work for a multinational organization who tested the 4-day work week. And so it's not impossible that they give it a shot. But because it's large, there's just so much more complexity, and it's just much more difficult. But if you set up the pilot the way, and you get the buy-in, because I think at this point the results are out there, people know there is the benefit, so why not try it? If you can get that buy-in, then just make sure the project is set up properly with the right metrics so that they can't refute what comes out of it. Because if you do it poorly, if you launch a pilot, again, it just becomes who's the loudest person in the room that's going to share their feedback, whether it's positive or negative, and they're going to just take that. You're not going to have the metrics to be able to say, okay, yeah, this person didn't like it, but look at the 99% of everybody else who loved it. So you need to have those stats ready to go. And stats don't just need to be quantitative. They can be qualitative as well, but you need both. So if you do get the buy-in for a very traditional, you need to make sure that it's the actual project is set up properly so that when the results come in, and it shows what's likely going to come out, which is that this is a great move organizationally. Maybe it's not something that you can do right away, but if you put the investment in to drive technology, innovation, efficiency, then you can do it down the road. I can't see why an organization would be able to ignore the benefits there. So it's just going to be a lot more work because there's just a lot more risk involved when you're a larger organization.
And I think that ties really well into our next Listener's Corner opinion. I don't know what we would call it. Question. So this is from more of a skeptical listener.
Love it.
Asking, isn't there a risk that employees will just end up working longer days to fit their work into 4 days, which can lead to burnout rather than preventing it?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think it speaks to what we were just talking about, which is why I think you said it was a good segue. You need to set up the project properly. Like, I think a lot of organizations, when they think about implementing a 4-day work week, they think, okay, great, let's just do it. Let's just go from 5 days to 4. It's not that easy. You need to really understand the organization, the situation that it's in. You need to understand what are the precursors in order to launch a 4-day work week effectively. And does the company have those in place? Are they innovative? Are they leveraging things like AI in order to automate some routine, mundane tasks that used to take people hours to do, so that you're leaving the knowledge work up to workers for less time? So you need to think about it in a potentially a multi-phase project rather than let's take the 40 hours that we're working and shift it down to 32. In order to get the benefit of those 8 hours, you need to take out 8 hours of work. Where do you get that?
Which is usually going to be like your administrative tasks or things like that.
So you need
like operational things too.
So this could be a multi-year, especially if it's a large organization. This could be a 2-year minimum thing in order to build that efficiency up. Because if the other option is you hire more people, right? Hire more people, then you can go to a 4-day work week. But now you got to think about, okay, now the benefits I need to see from the organization need to be significantly higher in order to accommodate the fact that I have this recurring additional expense whereas investments in things like technology is a big upfront cost, but you're going to see the benefits over time. So you just need to consider and think about, like, where are you at? And maybe it's not a one or the other kind of scenario. You may be able to introduce new technology, new innovation, streamline work, and then also increase staffing levels in order to accommodate the 4-day work week. And I do believe in the long term, you will see the benefits that you wouldn't have seen moving to a 4-day work week, because as we were talking about from the beginning, put employees first, they're going to do their best work, which means they're going to be more productive and they're going to deliver a better experience for their clients and their customers. And I think there is definitely a risk of burnout if you try to take the easy way out for implementing a 4-day work week and not do the hard work necessary to make sure that your company is set up for success. Yeah, and they have all the key enablers in place.
Yeah, I guess the third opinion that we had come up was about that potential impact on customer service and being able to respond to like client needs promptly and like in a timely manner. Because if you're only working 4 days a week now, but your business is something that can be running behind the scenes like 7 days a week, how do you address customer problems if they come up then, if you're not technically there?
I mean, at the end of the day, there are going to be situations where it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Like for my instance, right? Like I'm a one-person show. If I can work 4 days a week, but if that means there's going to be a day that I'm not responding to clients.
Yeah.
And is that something I'm willing to do? No. Now, obviously, I'm a one-person show, and most organizations all organizations I think that are considering a 4-day work week are not one person.
Yes.
So you need to consider like what the impacts are going to be. The larger the group, or the larger the number of employees that you have in your employee base, the more likely you'll be able to move work around so that clients don't experience that
disruptions.
Yeah, but that is a risk, and that's why it's important to pilot it in a controllable setting to see, is there that client impact? And that should always be one of the metrics as part of this implementation. And if client experience does drop, you need to think about like, all right, maybe this isn't for us. Or what do I need to do to mitigate that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like maybe you do need to hire more people, like you were saying, where maybe someone's 4-day work week is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Like
exactly.
To cover the people who work the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Or like some other iteration of that, right? So that you don't have an interruption in your service or an interruption in customer experience on any day of the week if you're like in a company that has a 7-day service that they're provided with.
Yeah, I think maybe to close and wrap up, I think the important thing here is that I think we need to move away from the mindset of productivity equals hours worked. And it needs to move to this idea of productivity equals output. And we are getting a certain output per week right now, regardless of hours worked. That output needs to stay the same. If we reduce hours worked and we want the output to stay the same, something's got to give to bridge that gap. And that could be technology, in order to kind of streamline tasks. So something that took us 3 hours now takes us 1. It's like, how do we get the same level of productivity or more out of less hours? And how do you bridge that gap? And if you take an organization as exists today, working 5 days a week, assuming everyone's at their capacity, like actually working, not just they're working 5 days, they're on the clock 5 days, but they're actually really only
taking
putting
coffee breaks,
all day,
going out to lunch.
Assume everyone's at 100% capacity. If they tried to move to a 4-day work week, productivity would drop right away. Because they have work for 5 days. And so really the question is, how do we create that excess capacity to allow us? And that's really just this idea of let's try to work smarter, not harder.
Yeah, and I think also tying it back to the beginning where we talked about the history, like in the last 100 years, we've become 400% more productive. And yet we haven't had a change in our work hours. But I think I would also argue that, especially with working remotely now and working at home, I think people are working more hours being at home versus what they were working when they went to the office. Because like we said, like you're stopping for more coffee breaks, you're like stopping by a desk and chatting with someone as you're passing by, you're going out to lunch with a coworker, you have your commute to and from work. And I think most of us know now that like what used to be our commute time is now an extra hour to put meetings into. So I think organizations need to really go back and reevaluate what are we actually expecting of workers. Like when we're saying 40-hour work week, but we're still scheduling meetings 7 to 7, that's obviously not going to fit even into your 5-day work week. So
and this would be easier if it was an all or nothing thing. If it was like a government run requirement or government requirement to say, okay, we're all moving to 4 days, then every one of your competitors is going to be doing the same thing. It's scary, it's risky to be a leader.
But look at all the benefits that could come out of it.
It is a risk.
It's one of those things.
Yeah, it is a risk. And there is a lot of benefits. There is a lot of risks. There's more risks if you don't launch the project effectively. And what is it? 70% of all change initiatives fail. So there's not really a great track record. So that's why it's important to put in the work in order to assess the situation, pilot it, test it out, track, monitor, iterate, try again, get it to a place where you feel comfortable, and don't ever stop listening to your employees. It's when you stop listening that things fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
And that's no different here. Before we end it though, what do you think about the 4-day work week?
I think I'm in an industry where we would be the latest adopters. In hospitals, similar to like you were saying, like we're publicly funded, we have some government funding, but we're still paper charting. Like we're not even doing electronic charting. At Mount Sinai they were electronic charting and electronic orders and stuff like that, but
it's tough.
Most hospitals it's different. Everywhere is different, and I just think we would be the ones who are the last ones to adopt it, because it would be a very risky change that's potentially impacting people's health at the end of the day.
Exactly.
So it's very risky for us to try and implement these giant changes, and we also have like 10,000 employees plus, let alone all of the patients that we're seeing in a day. Like it's impacting a really large amount of people, and that's just one hospital in a huge amount that's downtown Toronto. So
yeah, and I think it becomes publicly funded companies. It's difficult because at the end of the day, it's really hard to get budget for innovation.
Yeah, like
right?
Things are working the way they are. Like
yeah. But then
is it the most efficient? No, but
right.
like we're all getting our work done. We're getting things done in a relatively timely manner, but...
And then it becomes a question of, so if people have been identified as like workers who have to work 5 days, do they get compensated more?
They should.
Probably a topic for another day, but yeah, there's so much. It's not an easy conversation, not as easy as, oh, let's just do it. There's so many things to factor in, not just happening internally within the organization, but broader, because you also have to think about what is my decision to adopt a 4-day work week or to not adopt a 4-day work week due to my pipeline of talent. So if, for example, hospitals are like, no, we can't do it, it's always 5 days, are people, and knowing that everywhere else is 4 days, how many people are going to want to be in the hospital? I will share my opinion. Obviously, I think the 4-day work week can work. I would be hard pressed to find an area where I don't think it would.
Yeah.
With the right amount of investment and technology resources. But again, anything is possible with unlimited time and money. But I think it's worth a try. That's, my attitude with all change is it's worth a try. But you have to go into it with an open mind to listen to what the results are, listen to your employees, and then based off of that, make it a sound decision whether to do it or not. But it shouldn't be based on select people who are the loudest in the room. It should be based on what you're hearing en masse and what you're seeing in terms of the results. And just give it a shot. Yeah. Like, what do you got to lose?
Well, a bunch of companies have already been trying it over the last few years, because I think what's really holding everyone back is having those first few dominoes fall over, push the rest of everybody into that same thinking. Like,
that's right.
Like you said, even with Henry Ford making the 5-day work week, like, no, everyone was scared to be the first.
Yeah.
But all you need is like those first few like really large companies to do it and show people that it can work.
Yeah.
And I think people will follow suit.
Yeah.
But it's going to take a while.
I think it's getting the right attention from the right people. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the years to come.
Yeah.
So thank you all for listening to the podcast today. I actually really enjoyed this episode. I love talking about business.
That's one of our major topics.
Yeah, especially trends that haven't actually been adopted yet or in the mainstream, and seeing what will happen, and hopefully looking back on this podcast years later to be like, oh, this is what we thought before it became a thing.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy these types of topics. If you haven't already, please subscribe. We post podcasts every single week, every Monday. If you liked what you listened to here, feel free to share it with a friend.
Yeah.
We're
on social media at Reroute Reflections, on Instagram, TikTok.
Yep.
On Twitter or X, we're at Reroute Podcast.
That's right.
So you can find us everywhere. You can share it that way.
And thank you so much for listening and joining in. And remember, don't be afraid to reroute.
Bye.
Bye.